I want to preface this with some facts. I don't suffer from tinnitus or any other sort of hearing impairment. I never had a brain injury, and no one in my family suffers from any sort of schizophrenia or hallucination. I'm not under any massive stress. I don't suffer from anxiety, depression, or any other kind of debilitating mental health issue. With that out of the way, I want to tell you about my loud dreams. I was coming home from a business trip in Minneapolis when my car broke down. I was towed to a nearby garage in this small town in the middle of nowhere. I had to stay there for a night while they fixed my car. There was an apartment to rent on one of those short-term couch crashing apps, so I got a room in a 4-room apartment on the outskirts of the city. Nice place, recently renovated. It was a bit weird though. I never actually met the landlord. I just sent the money and found the keys under the welcome mat. That night, I had the strangest dream. I was fully aware that I was sleeping, but I dreamt I was right where I was, sleeping in a bed. I remember looking around the room. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened. Someone was standing in the doorway. I was still aware that I was sleeping, so I knew it wasn't real. Still, the absurdity of it all made me uneasy. This black silhouette, just looking at me, a single white eye, met my gaze. Then, it started to scream. It wasn't just an ordinary scream. It was a piercing shriek, like a long, drawn-out electronic feedback loop. Still, it didn't move an inch. That white eye, staring at me. I could feel my eardrums vibrating, like standing next to a loudspeaker. I knew it was just a dream. But the sound was so real. It continued for hours, and I couldn't escape. I just stayed there, knowing I was asleep. I tried waking myself up, trying to force my hand to slap myself. Finally, I managed to wake myself up. My ears were still ringing. I've never felt such relief waking from a nightmare before. The next day, my car was ready. I got in and drove off, getting out of town as fast as possible. I'd never had a dream like that before, so I was having a hard time forgetting about it. It felt like my ears were still ringing. I had to stop several times just to get my head straight, and I found myself dozing off whenever I got to a red light. Not that I was just tired, but it felt like my body was still trying to understand what had happened. It was all so surreal. When I got back home, I explained it all to my wife, Helen. Being a nurse, she did a routine check on me, asking me about my fluid intake, if I'd taken any painkillers, all the usual stuff. She's not the kind of person to get upset or worried for nothing, but this symptom seemed to bother her. Then again, she'd worried a lot lately. Family stuff. After about 20 minutes of checkups, I just had to stop her with a little white lie. "I'm fine," I said. "I'll let you know if it happens again. Can we just go to sleep?" "Are you sure you're okay?" she asked, kissing my cheek. "I'm fine," I smiled, getting up from the sofa. "I'll take a shower and head to bed." "Are you sure it just had one eye?" I gave her a concerned glance. What an odd question. That night, I tucked myself in nice and cozy. It had been a long drive, and I was more tired than I'd realised. It took me nothing but a few seconds to realise I was, once again, in my dream, dreaming that I was awake, in my bedroom, with Helen next to me. I could feel my sleeping body. "No," I made myself mutter. "No, please." But there was no arguing. Slowly, the silhouette stepped into the doorway, looking at me with that one white eye. It tilted its head. "Stop," I heard myself whisper. "Not again." It understood me. I know it did. But that didn't matter. Once again, it started to scream. That awful, painful feedback loop. A sound so loud it physically hurt me. Suddenly, I was awake. Helen was gently shaking my head, staring at me. I met her eyes with a smile. The sound was gone. Instant relief. "Thanks," I blurted out. "Thank you." "I heard it," she said. "Heard it? What do you mean?" "I could hear it," she whispered. "The sound. I heard it from your ears." The next day, there was no discussion. Helen was adamant that I went to a doctor. My ears were fine, but if I concentrated hard enough, I could still sort of imagine the sound being there. The old doctor I was seeing had trouble understanding my problem and imagined the sound hurting my ears. That made no sense. Still, he humoured me. He put a stethoscope to the side of my head. "So, what does it sound like?" he asked. "Like this electronic screech, like this, I don't know, just this weird sound getting increasingly louder." As I concentrated and tried to remember, the old doctor recoiled, looking at the stethoscope. He put a hand on my shoulder. "Do that again," he said. I replicated the effect 6 times. By concentrating hard enough, I could hear the sound so loudly that it physically came out of my head. If Helen had seen it, she'd have gotten an aneurysm out of worry. Luckily, she was busy chatting it up with her colleagues in the break room. The old doctor didn't know what to make of it. When he finally put down the stethoscope, he seemed flustered. "It is a variation of objective tinnitus," he said, "brought on by either stress or head trauma." "I've had neither," I insisted. "Then it's stress," he said, matter-of-factly. "Always is." He got up from his chair and moved over to his computer, almost showing me the patient record of the one who came in before me. "I think we're working with a pinched nerve. I will schedule you for further tests in a few days, but I think we should try the simplest and most obvious solution first." He handed me a prescription for light blood thinners. Could it be that simple? As I stepped out into the hallway, Helen was nowhere to be found. I started looking for the break room, but the entire floor seemed like a labyrinth. Finally, I decided to just call her. I picked up my phone, scrolled down to her smiling face, and then just stopped. I felt my body stopping. Frozen. I just stared at the screen. I started falling, face forward, into the ground. Was I falling asleep? Right there, right then? It was an out-of-body experience. My forehead took a nasty hit, but I didn't feel a thing. I could see the back of my head, as if I was lying on top of myself. Down the hallways, draped in black, was the same shadowy silhouette. Behind it was a nurse, moving so slow it was like she was running through syrup. The air rippled around her as she slowly noticed me. The black silhouette, on the other hand, didn't need any time at all. This time, I wouldn't just be woken up. I was unconscious. It was easier for me to move now. I dreamt I could stand up and move my arms and legs. It was as if the less conscious I was, the more freedom I had. I just pointed an angry finger at the silhouette. It eyed me with that one glaring white orb. "This ends now," I said. "This ends!" It was moving. It didn't usually move, but now it did. And it was coming for me. Fast. The screech exploded out of the shape, deafening me. The same terrible noise, growing louder by the second. This time, I saw the nurse down the hall cover her ears. Was the sound coming out of me so loud that even she could hear it? I didn't have time to reflect. It was closing in, fast. I could move, but the world around me didn't. I couldn't open doors or windows. It all just seemed stuck. And there, moving closer by the second, was the black silhouette with that one white eye. The sound grew louder. I finally found myself stuck in a hallway between 2 closed doors and the elevators. It was a dead end. The shape got closer. The sound grew louder. The sound grew so loud that my vision started to blur, and as it reached a dark hand towards me, I gasped. This was it. This was death. Helen had rolled me over onto my back and given me a shot of adrenaline. Air shot into my lungs. The world was still filled with sounds, but that awful screech was gone. Still, the hospital had gone to shit. The fluorescent lights had started to flicker. Half a dozen car alarms were hollering outside. The nurse down the hall was on the floor, crying. Her ears bleeding. Me? I just smiled. The sound was gone. Everything was better than that screech. The doctor said, objective tinnitus, I smiled. This is no fucking tinnitus, Helen sighed, leaning her head against my chest. I held her as she cried. The world around us, in ruin. They wanted me to stay overnight for observation, but Helen managed to get me out of there in 2 hours. They trusted her to take care of me. I had no idea what she had to say to convince that old doctor that blood thinners were useless, but it was clear that I wasn't getting the bigger picture here. Helen insisted on driving us home, telling me there was no way she'd let me behind the wheel of a car. I was inclined to agree. You have to tell me, she said. Did something happen on your trip? What do you mean? I asked. You have to tell me. She hit the brakes, causing the car behind us to swerve out of the way, leaning on the horn. Tell me! I know something happened! Of course, she was right. Again, I didn't want to worry her. After her brother had been in a car accident, she'd been on the verge of paranoid. It had been horrible. Every night she sat beside him, and every night he seemed just a bit closer to waking up. The days when she was there, they noticed the activity spiking. 5 weeks, she just sat there, waiting. We were dating even back then, and I remember driving up there to check on her over and over. I saw the toll it had on her. Then, when her brother finally woke up, he just wasn't the same. Eventually, he cut off all contact with the rest of the family. Since then, even the tiniest hint of something being wrong could send Helen spiraling into paranoia. I don't think I ever told you this, she said as cars passed us by. But I heard something from him too. What do you mean? Sounds, she yelled. Coming out of him! Sounds! Like, with me. She nodded, leaning her head against the steering wheel. Now tell me. Please. So I did. It wasn't a big deal, really. I'd been in meetings most of the day, and by night all I'd drunk was whiskey, cocktails and coffee. By the time I got back to the hotel room, I threw up. I was so dehydrated that my head was throbbing, but before I could drink any water, I blacked out. It was just for a few moments, but that was it. That's all there was to it. But then again, thinking about it, I could have sworn there was someone standing in the doorway behind me. That's all there was, I said. It was nothing. A few seconds. She just sat there, staring straight ahead at the open road. She didn't look at me. I think it's me, she said. First my brother, now you. It just takes a small lapse. That's all it takes. That makes no sense, I said. What do you mean? Have you listened to me? She said, looking at me with her tear-filled eyes. I mean, really listened. Every day. What are you talking about? No, I mean, really, really listened. She took my face in her hands and leaned forward. Our foreheads touched. It wasn't obvious at first, but after a few seconds, I heard it. Them. Hundreds of voices far away. Screaming, shouting, terrifying screeches and cackling laughter. It was there, just beneath the surface. All I had to do was listen. They follow me, she whispered. First they took him, now they want you. What do we do? Listen, please. I listened closely. There must have been dozens of them. I could even hear the screech far off in the distance. I was so distracted I didn't even notice her opening the passenger door or removing my seatbelt. With a swift shove, I fell out of the passenger seat. Helen took off down the road, wheels spinning from a burnout. She went straight past our exit further ahead. I just stood there by the side of the road, dumbfounded. She was gone. I had to adjust my eyes. For a few seconds, I could see them. A parade of silhouettes, all different sizes and shapes, parading down the highway. Some tall, some short, some with shining white teeth, an extra arm, one dragging what looked like the corpse of a man behind him, another using spears instead of legs. They were barely visible, but just like the sound, I could see them more clearly by concentrating. Suddenly, to the left of me, was a silhouette with the white eye. It could easily touch me, and my heart started beating like a drum. I had to stay awake. If I fainted, it'd grab me. I had to stay lucid. I tried to count the seconds, but never got past 2. I tried not to focus. I didn't want to hear its terrible sound. I closed my eyes, took deep breaths, and tried my best to fight off the panic. I could hear a faint screech coming closer to my ear. I couldn't remember any other sound in the world. My mind blanked. And suddenly, it stopped. A hand stroked my shoulder. "Hello," it whispered, and left. The parade disappeared down the highway. Helen just took off, and I haven't seen her since. I think she lured them all away, and if we stay separated, it won't come back. She couldn't risk losing me, like she did with her brother. What happened to him anyway? I've been trying to track her down, calling her friends and parents, but no one seems to know where she is. We've talked to the police, and they're looking for the car, but so far there's nothing. An officer mentioned in passing that she might have gone into the woods. Apparently, that's been a thing lately. Some kind of cult thing. I just wanted to come home. I can't stand going to bed every night, thinking that silhouette might come back for me. I can't sleep, knowing that it might, someday, return. I stand by the foot of my bed every night, anxious to lay down. I sometimes get panic attacks. Once, I just curled up in the fetal position in the shower, falling asleep out of raw exhaustion. Helen, if you're hearing this, we can figure it out. Whatever is happening to us, we can fix it. I know we can. These loud dreams can't go on forever.